She paid for her first-class seat. She boarded with quiet confidence. She had done everything right. So why did the flight attendant look at her like she didn't belong? Why did they ask her to move? And why, in the next 90 seconds, did the entire first-class cabin fall into chaos? Danielle Harper is a powerful black CEO, composed, brilliant, respected, but on Flight 227 none of that seemed to matter. In a moment that was supposed to be routine, she became a target of doubt, silence, and unspoken bias. What happens when a woman who built an empire is asked to surrender her seat? What does it reveal not just about an airline, but about a society still battling with who gets to belong? And, most of all, what if she says no? This is more than a story about a flight. It's about presence, dignity, and the moment the world stopped pretending everything was fair at 30,000 feet, if this story makes you feel something, like, share, and subscribe right now, because what happens next might just change everything. Now, let's begin. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed gently with the faint aroma of jet fuel lingered in the air of Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. Danielle Harper took a deep breath, savoring the moment of calm before the impending storm of meetings and negotiations awaiting her in Seattle. Even at 42, after building Cipher Secure into a $3 billion cybersecurity giant, Danielle still felt the adrenaline before every major deal. The forthcoming negotiation, if successful, would solidify her company's place as one of America's premier tech firms. It wasn't about the money. It was about the legacy. She wanted to create a legacy born of determination, hard work, and resilience. Glancing around at the bustling terminal, Danielle felt a quiet pride rise within her. Her journey had never been easy. Growing up in a small apartment on Chicago's South Side, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs, Danielle learned early the value of quiet perseverance. She vividly remembered the nights studying under dim streetlights after their electricity was shut off, promising herself and her mother that one day their struggles would lead somewhere beautiful. Today, clad in tailored designer jeans, a soft ivory silk blouse, and a navy cashmere blazer, Danielle felt the confidence of someone who had earned every bit of her success. Her hair, usually left natural, was elegantly styled into a neat bun, diamond stud earrings. Her mother's gift after Cipher Secure's first major deal caught the gentle sunlight as she walked toward the boarding gate. Everything about Danielle spoke quiet elegance, a subtle sophistication that didn't shout wealth, but whispered authority. Flight 320 to Seattle is now boarding first-class passengers. Please have your boarding pass and ID ready, announced the gate attendant warmly. Danielle moved smoothly toward the boarding line, her mind already picturing the detailed strategy she would review during the flight. She had booked seat 2A months ago, a window seat offering privacy to focus and prepare without distractions. At the entrance to the jet bridge stood Melissa Stanton, Skyroute Airlines' veteran flight attendant. Her steel gray hair was immaculately pinned, her uniform impeccable. Melissa, at 54, had seen thousands of faces, but something in her eyes shifted slightly as Danielle approached. "Good morning," Danielle greeted politely, handing over her boarding pass and ID. Melissa took the documents, her gaze lingering a beat longer than usual on the pass, then looking carefully back up at Danielle. "Morning. Just 1 second, please," Melissa said, her voice pleasant, yet carrying an undertone Danielle instantly recognized. "Of course," Danielle replied calmly, maintaining a gentle smile. Melissa scanned the boarding pass slowly, her eyes flickering between the pass and Danielle's composed expression. After what felt like an unnecessarily long moment, she handed it back, a slightly forced smile appearing. "Could I see your ID again? Please." Danielle felt the familiar dull sting deep in her chest, a sensation that always appeared at moments like these. She had learned long ago to mask it, to remain composed no matter how tiresome these small humiliations became. Handing over her ID a second time, she wondered silently if Melissa genuinely needed it again or simply doubted that someone like Danielle belonged in first class. As Melissa scrutinized her ID again, other first-class passengers began filing past them, their eyes flicking toward Danielle with mild curiosity or awkward disinterest. Danielle kept her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, refusing to betray the quiet storm building inside her. From several feet behind Danielle, Ethan Parker, a tech journalist with a keen sense of observation, recognized the subtle exchange immediately. Ethan had written extensively on Cypher Secure and had interviewed Danielle twice before, understanding instinctively that something was off. He subtly pulled out his phone, beginning to document the unfolding interaction. Melissa finally returned the ID, smiling stiffly. "Thank you. Enjoy your flight?" Danielle nodded, maintaining her composed demeanor. "Thank you." As she walked down the jet bridge, Danielle felt a familiar inner dialogue resurfacing. Was it just another routine security check, or was it something more insidious? She often wondered whether people like Melissa truly realized their own biases, or if they were simply acting out a script written by years of unconscious prejudice. Stepping onto the aircraft, Danielle greeted Lucas Martinez, the younger flight attendant whose open, friendly demeanor immediately contrasted Melissa's guarded one. "Good morning, Ms. Harper." Lucas smiled genuinely. "Welcome aboard Sky Route." Danielle returned his smile warmly. "Thank you." Lucas. Settling into the plush leather seat of 2A, she glanced out the window as the ground crew prepared the aircraft. She watched luggage carts bustling below, her mind briefly drifting back to another first-class flight months earlier, when a similar incident had quietly unsettled her. At the time, she had chosen silence, telling herself it wasn't worth making a fuss. Today felt different. Something deeper within urged her not to remain silent if the subtle disrespect continued. Across the aisle, an elderly couple, Gloria and Henry Foster, settled comfortably into their seats. Gloria caught Danielle's eye and offered a gentle, friendly smile, which Danielle returned gratefully. That simple exchange reminded Danielle of her mother's advice. "Dignity isn't negotiable, sweetheart. Always remember your worth." Yet, despite her achievements, these microaggressions continued to follow her, whispering doubts in her quiet moments. Danielle wondered fleetingly if her own daughter, now 15, would one day have to navigate these same exhausting interactions. The thought alone tightened her resolve. Perhaps, she mused, these moments were not just tests of her patience, but calls to action, to speak up, to create real change. As the last few passengers boarded, Danielle mentally reviewed her notes once more, refocusing herself for the crucial meetings ahead. She didn't know then how quickly and dramatically the piece of first class would soon unravel. Danielle felt prepared for every business contingency, but what she couldn't anticipate, as the aircraft door gently sealed shut, was how in just 90 seconds her carefully guarded composure would spark a confrontation that would ripple far beyond the confines of this airplane. Danielle adjusted her seatbelt and let her fingers run across the edge of the window. The cabin around her hummed with soft, ambient noise. It was the quiet rhythm of an early morning flight, the rustle of newspapers, the soft zip of a briefcase, the occasional clink of glassware being prepped for service. She tried to focus on her meeting agenda, scrolling through slides on her tablet, but a faint disturbance at the front of the cabin pulled her eyes up. Melissa Stanton. The same flight attendant who had double-checked Danielle's boarding pass at the gate now reappeared in the aisle. Her expression was neutral, but her walk had a purpose to it, one that caused the subtle tension in Danielle's shoulders to return. Melissa moved straight toward seat 2A. "Ms. Harper," she said, her voice a touch too polished. "I apologize, but I need to verify your boarding pass one more time." Danielle blinked, surprised. "You already scanned it at the gate," she replied gently. "Twice, actually." Melissa nodded, not quite meeting Danielle's eyes. "Yes, I just need to double-check something with the seating manifest. There seems to be a mismatch." Danielle was used to keeping her emotions measured. Years of boardroom battles, dismissive venture capitalists, and media interviews had taught her the value of restraint. But this ritual of doubt was different. It was not about business. It was about who she was, or, more precisely, who someone else assumed she was not. Still, she handed her boarding pass over without hesitation, her face unreadable. Melissa took it, glanced at it again, and this time stepped aside to speak with another crew member near the galley. Danielle heard only snippets of the conversation, but the phrases were clear enough. "I'm not sure. Seat 2A. Doesn't look right. Says first class." Danielle exhaled quietly and looked out the window again. Her hands were still, but her mind was a current of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to believe this was a genuine mix-up, a technical error, nothing personal. But another part, the more exhausted part, whispered something else. It reminded her of the hotel in Berlin last year, where the concierge asked if she was there to deliver a package, or the investor conference where a younger executive mistook her for catering staff. She closed her eyes for a moment, reaching inward to steady herself. Across the aisle, Gloria Foster had been watching. She leaned gently toward Danielle and said, not loudly, but with conviction, "You don't have to explain yourself. Honey, I've seen this before." Danielle turned to her and offered a small, grateful smile. Gloria patted her hand softly before settling back into her seat beside her husband. At the front of the plane, Ethan Parker was still seated several rows back, his phone in hand. He had not stopped recording. Ethan was not one to sensationalize, but he had an instinct for stories that mattered, and this felt like one of them. Melissa returned, boarding pass in hand. "Thank you, Ms. Harper," she said. "Everything seems to be in order." There was a pause before she added, "Although, we may have to make some adjustments if there's a seating conflict." Danielle's eyebrows lifted slightly. "A conflict?" she asked. "We're not sure yet," Melissa said, smiling with that same guarded polish. "It might just be a systems issue." Danielle nodded slowly. "Let me know if I need to move," she said, her tone even but firm, "though I hope that won't be necessary since I booked this seat well in advance." Melissa said nothing, merely gave a polite nod and walked away. Danielle settled back, but the knot in her stomach remained. It was not about the seat. It was about the message. It was about the subtle, persistent reminders that she was being watched differently, measured differently, doubted differently. She remembered her mother's words again. Some people will treat you like you do not belong. Baby girl, that is not your reflection. It is theirs. In the cockpit, Captain Robert Aldridge was receiving a quiet update from Melissa. He listened without comment as she described the confusion. His years of flying had taught him not to interfere unless absolutely necessary, and he trusted Melissa's instincts. But something about this scenario tugged at him. He made a mental note to monitor the situation. Back in first class, Danielle opened her laptop, hoping to distract herself with work, but the screen blurred slightly as her thoughts spun into places she had long compartmentalized. She thought of her daughter, Amina, just 15, and already dealing with questions about her hair at school. The way teachers seemed surprised at her test scores, the subtle slights that mirrored Danielle's own from decades earlier. She thought of the cipher-secure boardroom, where even now, some investors still questioned her ability to scale globally despite her proven track record. And she thought of this flight, which had started as another opportunity for progress but now felt like a quiet indictment of how little had changed in the spaces where power resided. Just then, Lucas Martinez approached with a kind smile. "Ms. Harper, can I offer you a beverage?" he asked. Danielle smiled warmly. "Water with lemon. Please." Lucas nodded and disappeared briefly before returning with the drink. He placed it carefully on her tray and said in a low voice, "I've read about your company. I think what you're doing with cybersecurity access for underserved communities is really inspiring." Danielle looked up in surprise. "You know about that?" Lucas smiled. "I follow tech news, and my sister's nonprofit uses your platform." For the first time that morning, Danielle felt something genuine. Recognition, respect, humanity. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." Lucas gave a modest nod. "Let me know if you need anything." Danielle turned to her tablet, but this time she opened a blank document. She began typing. Day 1. Another reminder that legacy is not just about building a company, but about confronting the spaces where we're told we don't belong and choosing to sit anyway. Just as she finished that line, a sudden voice cut through the cabin. "Excuse me, I think you're in my seat." Danielle looked up to find a man in an expensive gray suit standing beside her, a leather duffel slung over his shoulder. He had not even glanced at her as he spoke. She looked at him, then at her boarding pass still on her tray table. "Actually," she said calmly, "this is seat 2A. It's mine." The man looked down at her for the first time, his gaze flat, skeptical. "I'm in 2A, he said. "At least, that's what it says on my pass." Danielle raised an eyebrow, her voice still quiet. "May I see it?" He hesitated. Then Melissa appeared once more, stepping between them. "Mr. Caldwell," she said quickly, "there's just a small mix-up. Ms. Harper, we might need you to relocate to 4C while we sort this out." Danielle did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked around at the cabin. All eyes were watching now. Danielle Harper held her gaze steady, eyes locked on Melissa Stanton, who now stood between her and the man in the gray suit. The man had still not offered his boarding pass. He leaned casually on the headrest of the adjacent seat, acting as though the matter was already resolved in his favor. Danielle kept her voice even. "Melissa, I'd like to see his boarding pass before I'm asked to move." There was no anger in her tone, just clarity, precision. The same voice that had negotiated million-dollar contracts and navigated boardroom politics for over 2 decades. Melissa blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, turning slightly, "would you mind just showing me your pass real quick? We may have had a double assignment." Brian Caldwell exhaled as if he were being asked for something beneath him. Still, he dug into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and brought up his digital boarding pass. Melissa leaned in, squinted, and nodded. "It says 4C. Brian frowned. "That must be wrong. I was told at check-in that I'd been upgraded." Danielle shifted slightly in her seat. "Well, my ticket says 2A, and I booked this flight 6 weeks ago." Melissa's eyes flickered with discomfort. She turned again to Danielle. "Ms. Harper, I really don't want this to turn into something disruptive. If you wouldn't mind just moving temporarily, we'll try to sort this out once we're in the air." Danielle's chest rose and fell once, controlled, still calm. She folded her hands neatly in her lap before speaking. "Melissa, I'm not trying to cause a scene, but I have a right to sit in the seat I paid for. I'm not moving unless you have a valid reason." From across the aisle, Gloria Foster leaned slightly toward her husband. "She's handling it with more grace than I would," Gloria whispered. Henry nodded. "Still, this is wrong." Back in the aisle, the silence between Melissa and Danielle began to grow dense. The type of silence that gathers weight in the air, the kind that makes strangers turn down their headphones and glance around in hushed curiosity. Ethan Parker, still seated near the front, angled his phone carefully, continuing to record. He didn't usually live stream, but something told him this moment was going to mean more than just another video. This felt larger, sharper, like a shard of something buried for years had suddenly surfaced in front of witnesses. Danielle inhaled through her nose, then reached slowly for her purse. She pulled out her leather card holder and retrieved 2 things: her printed boarding pass and her company ID. She held them up with calm certainty. "This is my seat. Here's my pass, and just in case there's still some uncertainty, I'm Danielle Harper, CEO of Cipher Secure." Melissa's eyes locked onto the ID, her features tightening. "The name probably doesn't mean much to you," Danielle continued, still measured, "but I'd recommend looking it up. You'll find out very quickly that my company supplies part of the security software that runs your airline's booking system." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Brian Caldwell's expression shifted from irritated to something closer to stunned. Melissa opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. Before she could recover, a new voice broke the tension. "Is there a problem here?" It was Captain Robert Aldridge, his tall frame filling the narrow aisle as he stepped forward. His voice was deep and authoritative, but not harsh. He looked first at Melissa, then at Danielle, his brow furrowed with professional concern. "Captain," Melissa began quickly, "we've had a little confusion with the seating assignments. Ms. Harper was placed in 2A, but Mr. Caldwell was told he'd been upgraded. I was just asking Ms. Harper to temporarily move while we verify the seating list." Robert turned to Danielle, studying her calmly. "Ma'am, we certainly don't want any inconvenience," he said. "I understand you have a boarding pass for this seat, I do." Danielle answered, handing it to him, "and I've shown it 3 times now." He reviewed it, nodding. "Understood. Let me check the flight manifest myself," he said, turning slightly and speaking into his lapel mic. Danielle sat back, spine straight but relaxed. She had done nothing wrong, and yet she could feel the tension threading through her limbs. It was the tension of someone who had to defend her presence again. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was tired, not just from the morning, but from the years, the countless small incidents that built up like invisible weights on her back. She recalled a time in her late 20s at a venture capital summit when she'd been mistaken for an assistant 3 times in one day. Or the year she closed a multi-million-dollar deal, only to have the client's executive thank her male junior associate and ignore her entirely. It wasn't rage she felt now. It was a slow-burning refusal to let this be one more moment swallowed in silence. Captain Aldridge returned a few minutes later. "Ms. Harper, your seat is confirmed," he said firmly. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm afraid your seat remains at 4C. Brian blinked slowly, then scoffed under his breath. "Well, this is ridiculous," he muttered. Danielle didn't respond. She didn't need to. Melissa, suddenly aware of the stares, seemed to shrink slightly. "I'll escort you to your seat. Mr. Caldwell," she said quickly, trying to recover control. Brian grumbled something unintelligible and followed her toward the rear of first class. Captain Aldridge turned back to Danielle. "Apologies for the inconvenience, ma'am," he said quietly. "Let's get you in the air shortly." Danielle nodded once. "Thank you, Captain." He moved back toward the cockpit, and Danielle could feel the cabin exhale around her. Conversations resumed, devices turned back on, but the tension had not disappeared. It had only settled into something quieter, more introspective. Lucas Martinez appeared beside her with a glass of sparkling water and a slice of lemon. "Ms. Harper," he said gently, "I just want to say I'm sorry for what happened. That should never have escalated." Danielle accepted the glass with a small smile. "Thank you, Lucas. I appreciate you saying that." Lucas glanced toward the galley where Melissa had disappeared. "You're not the first passenger I've seen treated that way," he added, "but you're the first who said something." Danielle looked at him thoughtfully. "Maybe it's time more of us did." From across the aisle, Gloria Foster caught Danielle's eye and gave a small, approving nod. Danielle took a sip of water and opened her laptop again, but instead of reviewing her slides, she began typing something else. A single sentence. Respect is not given freely in spaces built on exclusion. Sometimes you must claim it with grace and make others see what they chose to overlook. She saved the document, closed the lid, and leaned back in her seat. The storm had passed, for now, but something had shifted. This time, she had not simply swallowed it, she had stood her ground, and the echoes of that choice were just beginning. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft taxied from the gate. First class had quieted. Save for the occasional click of seatbelts and whispered conversations, but beneath the stillness lay a charge that had not dissipated. Danielle Harper sat upright in seat 2A, composed, calm, and alert. She had reclaimed the space that was rightfully hers, but she knew the story was far from over. Her eyes occasionally drifted across the cabin to the faces of the passengers who had silently witnessed everything. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered tight smiles. The truth was, many did not know how to respond. Danielle did not blame them. She had spent much of her life surrounded by people who meant well but remained silent when it mattered most. Silence had always been the easier choice, the safer one. From behind the curtain separating the galley from the cabin, Melissa Stanton reappeared. Her expression was drawn, jaw stiff, movements brisk. She passed Danielle without a word, busying herself with the in-flight checklist. To the casual observer, she was simply doing her job. But Danielle noticed the flicker in her posture, the discomfort just beneath the surface. A few rows behind, Brian Caldwell had reluctantly taken his assigned seat. He stared at his phone with a clenched jaw, scrolling through emails as if trying to reclaim control. The leather of his seat creaked slightly under his tense shoulders. Danielle's gaze shifted slightly when she noticed movement from across the aisle. Rebecca Carlyle, a sharply dressed woman in her early 40s, turned toward her with a polite but noticeably strained expression. "I'm just going to say it," Rebecca said, a bit louder than necessary. "All that fuss over a seat. It held up the entire boarding process. Some of us have schedules, too." Danielle met her gaze steadily. "I didn't cause a delay. I was sitting in the seat I purchased. I was asked to move for no valid reason." Rebecca let out a tight laugh. "You could have just moved to another first-class seat and avoided all this drama." "I could have," Danielle said, voice even. "But then I'd be saying it's okay to be treated differently, even when I follow every rule. That's not a message I'm willing to send." The words hung in the air for a beat too long. Gloria Foster, seated nearby, turned her head just enough to speak up. "She's right," Gloria said firmly. "I've been flying for over 40 years. I've seen how women like us are treated. If no one ever says anything, nothing ever changes." Rebecca's face reddened slightly. She turned back in her seat, muttering something Danielle chose not to catch. Danielle adjusted the armrest and closed her eyes for a moment. But instead of calm, a rush of memory stirred within her. She was 10 again, sitting on the front steps of her grandmother's house in South Shore, holding back tears after a classmate had told her she was too dark to be pretty. Her grandmother, sturdy and wise, had crouched beside her, brushing her fingers along Danielle's cheek. "You don't let them decide your worth," she had said. "That's your power. You guard it." Danielle opened her eyes. She was still guarding it. From his seat, Ethan Parker caught the exchange between Rebecca and Danielle. He had muted the live recording for the moment but kept the camera steady on his lap. He had seen enough stories like this to recognize the pattern. A misunderstanding, a confrontation, a justification, a moment where the victim is asked to shrink, to accommodate discomfort, to make peace instead of justice. But what struck him most about Danielle was her poise, her refusal to flinch, her quiet power. Lucas Martinez made his way down the aisle, beginning the pre-departure beverage service. "Something to drink?" "Ms. Harper?" he asked, lowering his voice. "I'll have black coffee." "Please," Danielle said. "No sugar." Lucas nodded, returned moments later with a porcelain cup, and gently placed it on her tray table. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the coffee. Lucas met her eyes briefly and gave a small, respectful nod. Behind them, Melissa watched. There was something behind her gaze that wasn't quite anger. It was harder to name. Maybe discomfort, maybe fear, maybe the crumbling of something she had long believed was firm. She turned sharply on her heel and returned to the galley. In seat 3B, Rebecca Carlyle was tapping out a text message furiously. Danielle glanced over briefly, catching a glimpse of the screen. This woman's pulling the race card. Unreal. Danielle felt the familiar rush of emotion rise in her chest. Not rage, not even sadness. just that ache that comes from being misunderstood, again, from watching someone twist your truth into their excuse. She turned back to her tablet, but this time, she opened the Notes app. She typed, "I didn't ask for this, but silence won't protect me, and it sure won't protect the ones who come after me." 10 minutes later, the seatbelt sign chimed, and the plane began its ascent. The roar of the engines filled the cabin, muffling the noise of human tension but not dissolving it. Danielle looked out the window as the city disappeared beneath the clouds. She had always loved the moment of takeoff, that feeling of release, of going somewhere higher, but today the sky felt heavier. She turned back to her coffee and took a slow sip. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Ethan Parker standing. He approached her seat quietly and crouched beside it to speak without disturbing the others. "I'm Ethan Parker," he said, "tech reporter. I've written about Cypher Secure before." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "I remember. You interviewed me 2 years ago at the Houston Summit." Ethan smiled. "That was a great conversation." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I've been filming, not because I'm looking to sensationalize anything, but because I think people need to see what really happens in these moments." Danielle studied him. He was serious, thoughtful, not the kind of person looking to profit off someone else's pain. She nodded. "I understand. If at any point you'd like me to stop recording, I will," he added. Danielle paused, then said, "Keep filming." Ethan gave her a respectful nod and returned to his seat. Just as he sat down, a message buzzed on Danielle's phone. It was from Sophia Bennett, her executive assistant. Danielle glanced down and read it. "Morning, D. Just saw something strange. Social mentions of your name tied to Skyroot are starting to spike. I think someone's already posting video clips." Danielle blinked slowly. She hadn't realized how quickly things were moving. But that was the world now. Injustice no longer stayed quiet. It could trend in minutes. She typed back, "Let it unfold. I'm ready." The plane cruised into smoother air, but the cabin remained clouded in something heavier than turbulence, the kind of weight that did not lift with altitude. And Danielle Harper, still seated in 2A, knew the real storm had only just begun. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft leveled into cruising altitude. The clink of cups, murmured conversations, and gentle footsteps of attendants created a background hum, but none of it softened the edges of what had just happened. Danielle Harper sat still, eyes locked on the empty coffee cup in front of her. Her face remained composed, but her mind churned. A storm of memories, quiet grief, and sharp clarity rose within her, mixing with adrenaline and a familiar weight she had carried her entire life. She did not ask for this confrontation. She did not come to this flight seeking attention, but once again, it had found her. And this time, she was not going to let it slip away like all the others. Across the aisle, Gloria Foster gently placed a hand on her husband Henry's wrist. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "She reminds me of Rosa," she said. Henry glanced toward Danielle. His eyes filled with something more than admiration. It was recognition, a quiet understanding between generations. "She's going to do something," he said. "You can see it in her eyes." Behind them, in row 3, Rebecca Carlyle leaned over her tray table, furiously typing on her phone again. Her lips were pressed in a tight line, her jaw clenched. She did not look in Danielle's direction, but the tension radiated from her posture. Danielle's phone buzzed once more. It was Sophia again. Danielle. Twitter is exploding. Some guy named Ethan Parker posted a clip. It's already at 30K views. Major accounts are retweeting it. Danielle read the message, locked her phone, and exhaled. She could feel it now. The shift. This was no longer just a moment on an airplane. It was becoming a symbol, and symbols had power. But they also had consequences. She knew she needed to act strategically, not emotionally. Lucas Martinez appeared at her side once more. He knelt gently, lowering his voice. "Ms. Harper, I just wanted to say something off the record." Danielle turned toward him. "You've been very composed. I admire that. I've worked on flights for 3 years now, and I've seen things that, well, they never get reported." Lucas hesitated, then added, "You're not the first black passenger to be treated differently in first class, but you're the first to push back like this and not let it be dismissed." Danielle nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." Lucas glanced toward the galley, then leaned in slightly. "I don't know if this helps, but I overheard Melissa speaking with the gate agent earlier. She was frustrated that someone not dressed appropriately had been let through to board first." Danielle's eyebrows lifted just slightly. She said that she asked. Lucas nodded. "Her words, not mine." Danielle leaned back into her seat, eyes staring into the middle distance. "So it was about more than just the seat. It always was." "I appreciate your honesty," she said. "If anyone asks, don't put yourself at risk. But thank you." Lucas nodded once, stood quietly, and returned to his duties. From row 2B. Henry Foster suddenly stirred. He opened the slim leather portfolio on his lap and pulled out a small notebook. Gloria glanced at him. "What are you doing?" she asked softly. "Taking notes," Henry replied. "In case they try to spin this later. Dates, times, names." Gloria smiled faintly. "That's my attorney." Henry had been a civil rights lawyer in the 70s and 80s. He had spent decades filing complaints, defending protesters, and challenging systems designed to keep people like Danielle exactly where they were told to sit. A moment later, Danielle stood up. She adjusted her blazer, smoothed her blouse, and walked with purpose toward the front of the first-class cabin. Heads turned. Even those pretending not to watch leaned in slightly. Melissa emerged from the galley at the same moment. The two women faced each other like a long-delayed confrontation finally coming due. Danielle's voice was quiet, but it carried through the silence. "I'd like to speak to the captain." Melissa blinked. "The captain is busy flying the plane. Is there something I can help you with?" Danielle remained still. "This won't take long, and it concerns him." A few seconds passed before Melissa pressed the intercom beside her. A soft alert chimed, and, moments later, Captain Robert Aldridge emerged from the cockpit. He looked calm but curious. "Is there a problem, Ms. Harper?" he asked. Danielle met his gaze. "I'd like to formally report discriminatory behavior on this flight from your staff." The word landed like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. Captain Aldridge's posture shifted. "Ms. Harper, I understand there was a mix-up, but I was under the impression it was resolved." Danielle's voice never wavered. "The seat incident was only part of it. I've been singled out, scrutinized repeatedly, and spoken to with condescension from the moment I arrived at the gate. Other passengers were not treated the same." She paused. "And your flight attendant referred to me as being not appropriately dressed for first class before I even boarded." "I have a witness." Melissa's eyes widened. That's not true. Lucas, standing just behind the curtain, looked stricken. Danielle noticed him. She turned slightly and said, "You don't have to say anything, Lucas." But Lucas stepped forward. She said it. He said, "I heard it, and this isn't the first time." Melissa's face flushed, her jaw tightening. Captain Aldridge looked between them all, then drew a deep breath. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Ms. Harper. I take these matters seriously." Danielle nodded. "Then I'd like this incident documented, and I'd like a formal report filed with your airline." Captain Aldridge hesitated, then gave a short nod. "We'll make the necessary notes." Danielle stepped back and returned to her seat. The cabin remained quiet. Heavier now. People understood that something real had happened. Not drama, not disruption. A truth that had finally refused to stay hidden. Lucas returned to the galley, his hands shaking slightly. Melissa stared at him, then disappeared without another word. Back at her seat, Danielle picked up her phone and dialed. It rang once before Sophia answered. "Danielle, I need you to connect me with Jonathan Whitaker," Danielle said calmly. Sophia froze. "The CEO of Skyroute, yes. Use the direct line he gave me after last year's panel. Tell him I'm mid-air on one of his flights, and we have a situation." Danielle ended the call and stared out the window. The clouds stretched in a smooth line across the horizon. But inside, she felt the beginnings of something sharper, clearer. It wasn't anger driving her anymore. It was responsibility. Responsibility to herself, to her daughter, to every young black woman coming up behind her, who would one day find themselves on a plane or in a boardroom, facing a question that wasn't really about protocol at all. It was about belonging. And for the first time in a long time, Danielle felt the undeniable certainty that she had drawn a line. She was no longer just protecting her seat. She was defending the principle that no one should have to earn the right to be treated equally. The cabin remained silent, but the shift was seismic, and Danielle Harper was only getting started. The call to Sophia had lasted under a minute. Danielle Harper returned her phone to airplane mode, placed it gently on the tray, and folded her hands in her lap. Her pulse had slowed, her breathing even. But her focus was razor sharp. Everything in her life, from being overlooked in meetings to correcting professors who underestimated her intelligence, had trained her for moments like this. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She simply named the injustice. And as she sat back in her seat, the consequences of that quiet decision began to ripple. 3 rows behind her, Ethan Parker's phone buzzed again, his Twitter feed refreshed, and his latest video clip, 43 seconds of Danielle calmly defending her seat, had passed 75,000 views. By the time he looked up, it had crossed 90. The numbers jumped every second. Comments poured in. "This is why we record everything. She's all of us. First class while black is still a protest." Ethan's fingers hesitated over the screen. He clicked live. It was time. As the feed began streaming, his camera focused not just on Danielle, but on the cabin, the crew, the unspoken reactions. It was subtle, but it was history. And history was being made quietly these days, often in uncomfortable silence before the world caught up. In the front galley, Melissa Stanton stared at her hands. Her face was pale, her fingers fidgeting with the cap of a water bottle that had long since been emptied. Her ears burned. She could feel it, the gaze, the air changing. The performance of normalcy unraveling thread by thread. She had told herself she was just doing her job, following protocol, enforcing standards. But something about the way that young flight attendant, Lucas, had spoken up. It pierced a corner of her mind she had long kept hidden, a place that had justified too many decisions she never questioned. She looked up and saw Lucas moving quietly down the aisle, checking on passengers. She noticed how comfortably they spoke to him, how the older black couple had thanked him with their eyes. And, for the first time, Melissa wasn't sure she had done her job the way she thought she had. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Aldridge sat in the cockpit, listening to the muted hum of voices from the cabin. His co-pilot gave him a look. "You think she'll actually call Corporate Aldridge didn't answer right away." He thought back to the moment he saw Danielle's eyes when she requested the report. Not pleading, not angry. "Steady. Yes," he said. "She will." The co-pilot exhaled. Damn. Back in first class, Danielle checked her watch. It had been exactly 90 seconds since she hung up the phone. The cabin, though quiet in appearance, had changed. Passengers no longer hid their glances. Whispers moved from row to row. Some looked at her with newfound awareness, others with discomfort. A few, like Rebecca Carlyle, with open hostility. Danielle ignored them all. She opened her tablet again. Not to work, but to begin a document she had titled just minutes ago. Culture Shift Report, Skyroute Airlines. It wasn't a press release or a legal complaint, not yet, but it was the blueprint for what was coming. And, as she typed, her mind burned with clarity. A shadow appeared beside her. "Lucas." He leaned close and spoke gently. "Ms. Harper, Captain Aldridge would like to see you up front, when you're ready." Danielle closed the tablet, stood, and followed Lucas forward. As she passed Melissa, their eyes met for the first time since the confrontation. Melissa quickly looked away. In the small space outside the cockpit, the captain waited with the door closed behind him. "I wanted to say," he began, "that I regret how this was handled." Danielle waited. "I've flown for over 30 years. I've seen passengers lash out, yell, make threats. You didn't do any of that. You stayed composed, but you were clear, and I want you to know. I heard it." Danielle's gaze remained steady. "Thank you, Captain." He hesitated. "And if there's anything I can do to assist when we land security, corporate liaison, just say the word." Danielle nodded. "There is something. Name it. I want a direct call with your CEO the moment we land. I'll make the arrangements through my assistant, but I want Skyroute to hear this from me directly. Not from the press, not from social media. From me." Aldridge nodded. Understood. Danielle returned to her seat. As she sat, Gloria leaned in from across the aisle. "You're doing something important, dear," she whispered. "Don't let the pressure fool you. Most people can't carry this." Danielle turned toward her, softened slightly. "I'm not carrying it alone." Gloria reached across the aisle and squeezed her hand gently. Ethan Parker, still live streaming, caught the moment. His voice low, he narrated, "This isn't a viral clip anymore. It's something bigger, a truth that too many people know but are tired of hiding." His viewers passed 250,000. Hashtags began trending. Our first class, while black, shows Danielle Harper, a Skyroute fail, are equal at altitude across the country. Phones buzzed, screens lit up. Journalists at CNN and MSNBC forwarded the clips to their editors. Someone at Forbes recognized Danielle from her profile earlier that year and began drafting a sidebar. Tech blogs and social justice pages alike picked up the stream. In Skyroot's corporate headquarters in Seattle, Jonathan Whitaker had just stepped out of a leadership meeting when his assistant approached with a worried look. "Sir, I think you need to see this." She handed him her tablet. On the screen was Ethan Parker's live stream. Danielle's face filled the frame, steady, unshaken, the comments flying like sparks around her. Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Get PR, get legal, now," on the plane. Rebecca Carlisle had stopped texting. Her phone now displayed a breaking news alert. Her face paled as she read her own name in the comment section of a reposted clip. It hadn't even occurred to her that someone had caught her snide remarks. But the internet had sharp eyes. "Are you okay?" asked the man seated next to her. Rebecca didn't respond. She was already scrolling through dozens of angry messages tagging her business profile. Some included screenshots of her LinkedIn. Her real estate firm's Yelp page had already begun flooding with one-star reviews. Brian Caldwell, who had returned to 4C after his seat was reclaimed, kept his head down, gripping the armrests. A woman 2 rows back tapped his shoulder. "Was that you in the video?" Brian didn't answer. She snapped a photo of him anyway. The flight was halfway to Seattle, but the real turbulence had just begun. Danielle Harper leaned back in her seat. The storm was building fast outside the plane, but inside, she was calm. She knew she was no longer just a passenger. She was now the center of a reckoning. Danielle Harper had always believed in preparation. In her world, poise wasn't just a personality trait, it was armor. She built it deliberately over years, piece by piece, from sleepless college nights, failed pitches, rooms where her voice was drowned out until she turned silence into strategy. But even she wasn't fully prepared for this. Her phone, still in airplane mode, buzzed softly with queued notifications, messages from colleagues, pings from board members, mentions multiplying by the second. The video was viral now, not just on Twitter but across TikTok, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Someone had looped her calm response into a trending audio clip. Another user overlaid it with side-by-side footage of famous civil rights moments, labeling her the modern-day quiet protester at 30,000 feet. Across the aisle, Gloria watched her closely. "You all right, honey?" she asked gently. Danielle turned. The softness of Gloria's voice a balm in the midst of the social media explosion she had accidentally triggered. "I don't know yet," Danielle admitted. "I didn't mean for this to go viral." Gloria nodded. Truth usually doesn't ask for an audience. It just finds one. Danielle allowed herself a small smile. Meanwhile, Ethan Parker was in a balancing act. His live stream had just crossed 600,000 viewers. Every moment he captured became content, every whisper a headline. But he was careful, respectful. He had turned off comments temporarily to avoid the vitriol that sometimes followed these viral moments, both from allies and agitators. He looked at Danielle, then slowly ended the stream. The moment didn't need more attention, it needed reflection. Up in the cockpit, Captain Aldridge spoke through the secure line to ground control. "I need you to get corporate on standby," he said. "This is escalating quickly." The voice on the other end acknowledged. The captain sighed and looked out at the clouds. He wasn't just worried about fallout, he was worried about truth. Back in the main cabin, Rebecca Carlisle sat stiffly in her seat, phone clutched tightly in one hand. She'd gone from annoyance to panic in less than 20 minutes. Her name was out there. Her company had already been tagged. She tried to draft an apology post but kept deleting and rewriting the first sentence. Across the aisle. Henry Foster leaned slightly toward Danielle. "Do you want help crafting a statement?" he asked softly. "I used to do this kind of thing for civil rights leaders back in the day. Messaging matters when the fire's this hot." Danielle gave him a look of appreciation. "Let's wait until we land," she said, "but I might take you up on that." Suddenly, Melissa Stanton reappeared, approaching Danielle's row. Her shoulders were pulled back, but the tension in her face betrayed her nerves. She held a folded slip of paper in one hand. Danielle looked up. "Ms. Harper," Melissa began, "the captain has authorized a preliminary incident report to be documented on board. Would you like to sign your statement now or wait until after landing?" Danielle considered her carefully. "Let me see the form," she said. Melissa handed it over. It was pre-typed, with blanks left for Danielle's account. At the top was the heading Internal Conduct Report, Passenger Complaint. Danielle skimmed it quickly, eyebrows narrowing as she noticed several questionable phrases. Passenger expressed discomfort but refused compliance. Issue resolved by seat reassignment and verbal de-escalation. "This wording implies I was the one causing disruption," Danielle said flatly. Melissa flushed. "That's just standard phrasing. You can amend your section, of course." Danielle handed the form back. "I'll be writing my own version," she said, "not editing someone else's story." Melissa gave a tight nod and retreated without another word. Danielle turned to her tablet again and opened a new document. Incident aboard Skyroute Flight 227. Personal account. She began typing, each keystroke deliberate, not dramatic, not embellished, just truth. When a system is built to exclude, it doesn't need to shout. It whispers in protocols, smiles in condescension, and hides behind procedures. Today, I was expected to comply, to shrink, to move. I didn't. Row by row, her words poured out. She wasn't just documenting, she was reclaiming. A sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lucas, returning from his galley break. "There's something you should know," he said quietly, crouching by her seat. Danielle looked up. "After I backed you up," he said, "Melissa called someone from corporate on her break. She was panicked, said you were threatening the integrity of the cabin." Danielle's eyes narrowed. She said what Lucas nodded. "She framed it like you were dangerous. Calm, but dangerous." Danielle exhaled slowly. She wasn't surprised, just exhausted. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Lucas hesitated, then added, "If anyone asks, I'll testify, on the record." Danielle placed a hand over his. "That means more than you know," she said. At that same moment, a notification slipped onto Ethan Parker's screen. His email. Subject line, interview request, Danielle Harper. 3 major networks were now chasing the story. He hesitated, then tapped out a reply. "She's not speaking to media until she's landed and had time to breathe. Respect that." The response was instantaneous. "Understood, but we'll be waiting." Back in seat 2A. Danielle sipped the last of her coffee. She looked around the cabin. So many people pretending not to watch. But they were watching. They had been watching for years. Some just chose to stop pretending today. The clouds outside began to thin. The first soft tone of dissent filled the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting our initial approach into Seattle shortly." Danielle's mind turned inward. She thought about her daughter, Layla, just 13, back home with her mother. What example was she setting for her? She remembered Layla asking one night, "Mom, do you ever get scared when you speak up?" Danielle had told her the truth. Every time. But I do it anyway. Now, more than ever, those words meant something. She picked up her phone and began typing one more thing. A message to Layla. "I'll be home late tonight, but I want to tell you something first. I stood up for myself today, not with yelling, just with the truth, and people listened. Layla wouldn't see it until she got home from school, but she'd understand." The captain's voice returned. "We'll be touching down in approximately 15 minutes. Please ensure all electronics are secured." Danielle slipped her phone into her bag and closed her tablet. The descent began. Outside the window, the mountains came into view, and the clouds peeled back like curtains revealing a stage. Below them, Seattle waited, and Danielle Harper was no longer just arriving. She was about to land in more ways than one. As the aircraft made its final descent, the seatbelt sign dinged above Danielle Harper's head. She pulled her blazer closed with one hand and stared through the small oval window. Below, the city of Seattle sprawled beneath a fading afternoon light, calm and unaware of the firestorm waiting to touch down with her. Passengers began to stir. Bags were zipped, trays locked, but first class remained unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that follows a reckoning. Danielle had not spoken since she closed her tablet. She sat tall, poised, breathing evenly. Her thoughts were no longer racing, they were aligned. She wasn't walking off this plane as a CEO, she was walking off it as the story. Behind her, Gloria Foster reached for her husband's hand as they prepared to land. Henry glanced out the window, then back at Danielle. "She's going to change things," he said quietly. "She's already started," Gloria replied. The tires kissed the tarmac with a soft bump, the cabin shifting forward as the brakes caught. A collective exhale spread through the plane, but no one moved. Not yet. Danielle looked down at her phone. No signal just yet, but she knew the moment Wi-Fi returned, everything would accelerate. Within seconds, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Welcome to Seattle. We'll be arriving at Gate C12. Please remain seated until we've reached the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. On behalf of Skyroute Airlines, thank you for flying with us today." Danielle allowed herself a breath, the first one she had taken without calculation since the moment Melissa had questioned her seat. Then her phone lit up. Messages flooded in hundreds. Sophia had left 5 voicemails. Her attorney, Mira Langston, had texted. So had 3 board members, 1 senator, and someone from the Department of Transportation. She didn't open any of them. She opened Layla's reply. "I'm proud of you. Mom, I saw the video. I love you." Danielle closed her eyes. Just for a second. That was the only message that mattered in this moment. As the plane pulled up to the gate, passengers began unbuckling, overhead compartments clicked open, but no one moved from first class. Not until Danielle stood. She gathered her things with quiet grace and slung her black leather bag over her shoulder. Her heels clicked softly as she stepped into the aisle. Lucas Martinez appeared by the galley door, holding a bottle of water. "For you," he said. "You might need it." Danielle took it with a small, grateful smile. "Lucas," she said, "you've got a future. Never forget what you stood for today." He looked down, a little embarrassed, then nodded. Behind him, Melissa stood stiffly, arms crossed. Her eyes didn't meet Danielle's. Danielle didn't wait for an apology. She didn't need one. As the cabin door opened with a mechanical hiss, Danielle stepped onto the jet bridge and walked directly into a waiting crowd. 2 airport officials, a Skyroute regional director, a woman in a navy pantsuit holding a tablet with a live feed playing behind her shoulder, reporters. Danielle stopped, eyebrows lifting slightly. Sophia was already there, standing off to the side. She met Danielle's gaze, walked up quickly, and handed her a phone. "Jonathan Whitaker," she whispered. "He's on the line." Danielle took the call. "Mr. Whitaker," she said calmly. His voice came through the line, clipped, formal. "Danielle, I want to express my sincerest apologies. I've seen the footage. I'm already en route to meet you in person. Is that necessary?" she asked. "Yes," he replied, "and not just for optics. We have a problem, and it starts with how this was allowed to happen." Danielle said nothing. She didn't need to help him find the words. Whitaker continued, "I want to meet with you tonight. We'll offer a formal apology, full accountability, immediate review of every first-class protocol, public statement within the hour. And the staff involved," she asked, "there will be consequences." Danielle glanced at the growing press beyond the glass windows. Cameras were being set up. Her face was already on the monitors behind the reporters. She returned the phone to Sophia and walked forward. The airport director stepped aside, allowing her to pass. Ethan Parker, holding a camera rig just behind a local news crew, locked eyes with her. He didn't lift the camera. He nodded, and she nodded back. As Danielle moved through the crowd, someone called out her name, a woman's voice. She turned slightly. It was a younger black woman, maybe in her 20s, holding a sign written in marker, "You made us visible." Danielle blinked once, then turned back and walked toward the media barricade. A reporter leaned into her mic. "Ms. Harper, any comment about what happened aboard Flight 227? Danielle looked directly into the camera. "I'll speak tonight, after I've had a chance to sit down with Skyroute leadership. But what I will say now is this: no one should have to defend their right to exist in a space they've earned." The reporters fell silent for a beat. Then the questions erupted. Danielle stepped away. Sophia caught up beside her. "There's a car waiting." Danielle nodded. "Have Mira draft a preliminary statement, and I want to personally approve Skyroute's response before it goes out." "Already on it," Sophia replied. They walked together toward the exit, but even as they moved, Danielle could feel eyes on her. The crowd behind the glass had grown. So had the pressure. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every silent moment that came before this one. In the car, the driver handed Danielle a cold towel and an iPad already open to a press dashboard. She didn't look at it right away. Instead, she looked out the window as Seattle passed by. Trees, buildings, people living their lives. She thought of her parents, of the first time she boarded a plane and was seated in the back, even though her boarding pass said row 3. Of every time she'd walked into a luxury hotel and been asked, "Are you here for the event?" Of every glance that asked a question without words. She thought of all those moments and how they led to this one. The car turned onto Mercer Street. The Skyroute executive building loomed ahead. Danielle sat up straighter. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the next runway. The Skyroute executive tower rose from the heart of Seattle's business district like a promise or maybe a warning. Danielle Harper had walked into hundreds of buildings like it in her life. some with revolving doors that turned slower for her, some with lobbies that watched her too closely. But today, none of that fazed her. She stepped out of the car and into the glass foyer with Sophia Bennett beside her. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing sharply as security glanced up. They didn't stop her. They knew who she was now. Waiting at the elevator was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit with a name badge that read Monica Del Rey, VP, Corporate Affairs, Ms. Harper, she said warmly, her voice clipped by urgency. Thank you for coming. The board is waiting upstairs. Mr. Whitaker should be arriving shortly. Danielle nodded without smiling. I'm not here for tea and apologies, she said. Monica gave a nervous nod. Of course. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor was silent. Danielle stood still, her posture calm, but inside she was rehearsing. This wasn't just about her seat. This was about every policy, every form of implicit permission that allowed someone like Melissa Stanton to question her right to exist in a space of comfort and prestige. This was about system failure. And Danielle Harper didn't address failure with emotion. She addressed it with precision. When the elevator doors opened, a long boardroom stretched out in front of her like a courtroom. The people at the far end looked up. 6 executives, legal counsel, the airline's director of HR, and standing beside an empty chair at the head of the table, Jonathan Whitaker himself. He moved forward quickly and extended his hand. Danielle, thank you for coming on such short notice. She shook his hand, firm but brief. I believe the short notice was yours. She replied. He gave a quick, rueful smile and gestured for her to sit. Danielle remained standing. I'll speak first, she said. She opened the leather folder she had carried with her from the plane. Inside was a printed transcript of her written account, a flash drive containing passenger statements, and a digital copy of Ethan Parker's video clip. The incident aboard Flight 227 wasn't just a moment of personal insult. She began. It was the natural result of a system that quietly, consistently upholds a set of biased expectations. Melissa Stanton didn't act alone. She acted with the full confidence of a culture that had never corrected her before. She turned toward Monica, then to the HR director. I've reviewed your employee handbook. There is no mention of implicit bias training, cultural competency, or any policy related to recognizing socioeconomic profiling. A few eyes glanced down. Danielle continued. More importantly, when I requested a formal report mid-flight, the wording was already manipulated to imply I had been difficult. This is not a misstep. This is institutional language designed to shield the company from accountability. Whitaker raised his hand. I won't interrupt your statement, he said, but I want to acknowledge that every word you're saying is being taken seriously, and that changes are already in motion. Danielle lowered the folder onto the table. I'm not here for promises. I'm here for commitments, immediate action, public acknowledgement, and full transparency. She paused. Not because I'm angry, but because I've earned this seat, and no one, no policy, no employee, no protocol gets to deny me that again. The room was silent. Finally, Jonathan Whitaker spoke. You're right, he said simply, and it shouldn't have taken this long for someone in my position to say it out loud. He turned to the legal counsel and HR director. Effective immediately, Melissa Stanton is being placed on unpaid leave pending an independent review. We're launching an internal audit of all frontline training materials. revising the handbook to include mandatory bias education, and restructuring our escalation protocols for in-flight conduct. Danielle watched them carefully. I'll also be hiring a third-party firm, Whitaker added, to conduct a racial equity audit across every branch of Skyroot's customer service operations. We want your input on that process. Danielle raised an eyebrow. You want me to consult Whitaker, met her eyes. I want you to lead it. Murmurs spread across the room. A few executives shifted in their chairs. Danielle remained still. You're asking me to fix what your team ignored for years. I'm asking you to make sure it gets fixed the right way, he replied. Danielle studied him. There was no smugness in his voice, only fatigue, and something close to shame. I'll consider it, she said. She looked around the table again. But know this, I don't want a symbolic partnership. I want measurable change. Whitaker nodded. You'll have whatever resources you need. Danielle closed her folder. I'll also be holding a press conference this evening, she said. I expect your team to issue a statement before then, one that admits fault, not one that praises your response to it. Monica scribbled notes. Others nodded silently. Danielle turned to leave, but stopped in the doorway. One more thing, she said, her voice cool. That flight, Gate C-12, has a history. 4 other black passengers have emailed me since I landed, each with nearly identical stories. Some were moved, some were questioned, none were listened to. She looked at Whitaker. You don't just have a training problem, you have a cultural one. Then she left, back in the lobby. Sophia handed her another phone with texts stacked like dominoes, reporters, activists, celebrities. A well-known NBA star had just posted Danielle Harper is who we've been waiting for. Danielle ignored them all. They exited the building into a sea of flashing cameras. Questions rang out. Will you sue? Do you want Melissa Stanton fired? Do you feel this has opened a national conversation? Danielle raised one hand and stepped up to the mic. I came here today not to seek punishment, but to seek truth. She began. What happened aboard Flight 227 is not unique. It's just visible, and that visibility gives us an opportunity to reflect, to change, and to build something more worthy of every seat we occupy. She didn't speak long. She didn't have to. When she finished, the silence from the crowd said more than applause ever could. Later that night, as she returned to her hotel suite, Danielle received one final call. It was Layla. Mom, she whispered, you were amazing. Danielle felt the lump rise in her throat. I'm proud of you too. Baby, she said. This was for you. She looked out at the Seattle skyline, and for the first time all day, she allowed herself to feel it. Not relief, not vindication, but hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this was more than a viral moment. It was the start of a movement. Danielle Harper stood by the tall window of her hotel suite, watching as the night lights of Seattle shimmered against the sound. The phone in her hand was quiet for the first time all day. No messages, no alerts, no statements to review, just silence. And that silence, after a storm like this, didn't feel like peace. It felt like the moment before the next tremor. Behind her, Sophia poured 2 cups of chamomile tea. She didn't speak as she handed one to Danielle. They had been working side by side for 10 hours straight. At some point, the caffeine had stopped helping. Danielle sipped slowly, her thoughts heavy. I should feel good, she said softly. Sophia sat down. You changed the course of a company today. I also dragged my face through every news outlet in America." Sophia didn't argue. She let the weight settle. Danielle turned from the window and sat down across from her. The low hum of traffic below reminded her that the world hadn't stopped, even if her life had been rerouted into another orbit. "I wasn't trying to start a movement," Danielle whispered. Sophia looked at her carefully. "You didn't start it. You just lit the flare." Danielle leaned her head back against the chair, eyes closed, and now everyone's watching me to see what I do next. Sophia reached into her bag and handed Danielle a folder. "These are the requests we've gotten just since 5 o'clock. Speaking engagements, advocacy roles, strategic partnerships. The Urban Equity Alliance wants you to keynote their summit." Danielle opened it slowly. "So many names, so many asks. I'm not an activist," she murmured. "You don't have to be," Sophia replied. "You just have to stay honest." Danielle nodded slowly, but the truth was, her honesty had always been private. Her leadership had always been quiet, controlled. Now, millions of strangers had opinions about her, expectations she hadn't invited but now had to carry. She put the folder down. "I need to talk to someone who isn't part of this storm." Sophia smiled faintly. "I already scheduled a call with Mira for the morning." Danielle shook her head. "Not my lawyer, my mother." Sophia blinked. Would she understand? Danielle chuckled dryly. "She raised me on protest songs and books banned from my school library. She'll understand more than I do." She stood and stepped into the adjoining room, dialing a number she hadn't used in weeks. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Danielle." There was a pause. "You all right?" Baby Danielle sat down on the bed and finally let the emotion she'd been controlling all day rise to the surface. "I'm okay, Mama, I think." Her mother's voice was soft, but firm. "I've been watching you all day. You were born for this moment, even if it doesn't feel like it." Danielle felt the pressure in her chest ease slightly. "I didn't mean for it to be this big." "No one does," her mother replied. "But it's not about what you meant. It's about what you did." Danielle leaned her head against the headboard. "They want me to lead an equity audit for the whole airline." Her mother's silence was thoughtful. "And what do you want?" Danielle didn't answer right away. "I want to not be tired," she said finally. Her mother chuckled gently. "That might be asking too much." "I want it to matter," Danielle said. "I want it to go beyond hashtags and press conferences." "Then don't let them make it about you alone," her mother said. "Make it about every person who never had your seat. That's the only way it sticks." Danielle sat in the quiet after the call ended, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. Her mother was right. This wasn't about her anymore, but that didn't make it easier. Back at Skyroot headquarters, Jonathan Whitaker sat at his own desk, reviewing the company's public response line by line. Legal had softened the language, PR had laced it with euphemisms, and HR had trimmed any explicit references to race. He pushed the paper aside. "This won't fly," he muttered. He picked up the phone and called the one person he trusted. "Monica, we're rewriting this. It has to be real. It has to be accountable. If we get it wrong, we lose more than press. We lose legitimacy." She agreed. They began working through a new draft, line by line, choosing honesty over comfort. In another part of the city, Melissa Stanton sat in her living room, the TV playing on mute. Her email had been flooded. Her name was trending, but not in the way she wanted. She had always prided herself on being professional, polished, respectable, but now the world saw something else. Her friends' messages were cautious, a few supportive, most silent. She hadn't apologized. Not yet. Part of her still didn't believe she had anything to apologize for. But another part, the part that had watched Lucas speak up, wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had become exactly what she claimed she wasn't. The night wore on. Danielle, now wrapped in a blanket, opened her laptop and began typing a speech. Not a viral post, not a statement, a story. She didn't know where it would lead, but she knew people were listening, and if she had the mic, she would say something that mattered. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster. The seat I paid for wasn't just a seat. It was a space I had earned through sacrifice, through excellence, through the relentless pursuit of fairness in places that never gave it freely. When I was told to move, it wasn't about comfort, it was about control, but I stayed, and that, apparently, is what made it history. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. She closed the laptop gently and looked out the window one more time. The skyline shimmered, and somewhere out there, someone else had seen what she did. Someone else would decide not to move next time. She didn't need a movement to be hers. She just needed it to keep going. Danielle Harper stood behind the velvet curtain, listening to the low murmur of the audience gathering in the hall beyond. It had been nearly 24 hours since she landed, and the world hadn't stopped talking. Her inbox overflowed with invitations. Her story had become a lightning rod for conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and community forums alike. And yet, she had barely spoken publicly since that first press conference. Tonight would change that. "You don't have to do this," Sophia said gently, adjusting the mic clipped to Danielle's blouse. Danielle looked over, calm but firm. "Yes, I do." Sophia didn't argue. This wasn't just a speech. It was a reckoning. Across the country, screens were already tuned in. The auditorium was filled with community leaders, airline officials, press, and everyday people who had quietly claimed their place in the audience. They weren't there for drama. They were there for truth. Danielle inhaled slowly. Her hands were steady. Her voice rehearsed but real. She had rewritten the speech 3 times the night before, unable to sleep. But in the end, she had chosen to speak from the place that mattered most, her own experience. A staff member gestured to her. "Ready?" Danielle nodded, then stepped through the curtain and into the lights. Applause rose immediately, but Danielle did not smile. She did not wave. She simply walked to the podium and waited for the room to settle. When it did, she began. "When I boarded Flight 227, I did so as a paying passenger, a professional, a mother, a black woman. I had no intention of making a statement, but sometimes statements find you." The audience leaned in. "I was told, indirectly, that my presence was disruptive, that my seat was inconvenient, that protocol somehow superseded identity, and for a moment, I thought maybe I should just move, just make it easier." She paused, but I didn't, because my presence was not the problem, the perception was. A quiet wave of understanding passed through the crowd. Some people say what happened to me wasn't personal, that it was a misunderstanding, a simple mistake. Danielle scanned the room. "But let me ask you this. How many mistakes must we absorb before they stop being accidental and start being systemic? Murmurs of agreement rose in the back. We teach people to be polite, to smile through it, to avoid escalation, but all of that comes at a cost, the cost of shrinking, the cost of silence. And the worst part is, we start believing that's normal. Danielle's voice remained calm, but it carried weight. I didn't want attention. I didn't want headlines. I wanted dignity. She paused again, letting the word linger. But sometimes dignity must be defended. Not through rage, not through confrontation, but through presence. The room was silent now, listening, reflecting. I'm not the first black woman to be told to move. I won't be the last. But every time one of us stays seated, strong, and seen we shift the landscape for the ones who come after. Danielle stepped away from the podium slightly. I've been asked over and over again what I want from all of this. A lawsuit, a resignation, a moment in the spotlight. She shook her head. I want the systems that allowed this to be examined. I want the assumptions we carry about who belongs where to be confronted. And I want accountability not just when it's public, but when it's personal. A few heads nodded, then more. This isn't just about airplanes. It's about access, about how we police comfort and assign worth without even realizing it. Danielle exhaled slowly. I didn't do anything special. I just stayed in my seat. But sometimes staying is revolutionary. She stepped back, and the applause began slow at first, then rising until it filled the room like thunder. Not loud because of volume, but because of conviction. Backstage, Sophia wiped her eyes quietly. Ethan Parker, standing nearby with his camera off for once, murmured, "That wasn't a speech, that was a shift." Danielle returned backstage, her face calm but flushed. "Do I still have time to catch my flight?" she asked. Sophia blinked. "You're flying out tonight." Danielle nodded. "I need to be home. Layla's got a science fair tomorrow." They both smiled at that. As they left the auditorium, reporters tried to approach. Danielle gave a respectful wave but didn't stop. She had said what she came to say. At the airport, Skyroute's CEO, Jonathan Whitaker, personally greeted her at the private terminal. "This time, no paperwork," he said with a slight smile. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "No surprise upgrades either. I paid for my seat." He chuckled. Duly noted. Lucas Martinez stood by the gate, in full uniform. Danielle walked up to him. "Still on duty?" He smiled. "After yesterday, they promoted me to senior cabin lead." Danielle tilted her head. "Well earned." He hesitated. Melissa sent a letter to the crew, an apology. She didn't make excuses, just acknowledged it all. Danielle nodded. "I hope she learns from it." Lucas looked at her sincerely. She wasn't the only one who needed to. Danielle stepped onto the plane without ceremony, this time walking down the aisle with quiet recognition. Some passengers looked up, their expressions ranging from awe to gratitude to quiet respect. She took her seat, first class, no questions asked. As the plane began taxiing, Danielle looked out the window, watching the runway lights blur into motion. For a moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, not to escape, but to breathe. At 30,000 feet, the world looked different. But tonight, it wasn't about the altitude, it was about the direction. She didn't know what tomorrow's headlines would be. She didn't know if this momentum would last. But she knew who she was, and she knew that seat 2A was not just a seat anymore. It was a symbol of earned space, of visible truth, of a woman who didn't move. The plane touched down in Atlanta just after sunrise, its shadow sweeping across the tarmac like a curtain closing on a stage. But for Danielle Harper, this wasn't the end of the show. It was the beginning of something deeper, something she hadn't asked for but now felt born into. Passengers filed off ahead of her. A quiet nod from the flight attendant, a soft smile from an older woman in 3B. No questions, no stares, only respect. Danielle stepped into the terminal with her bag slung over her shoulder, blazer crisp, face calm. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand, but she ignored it. She had one priority this morning. Her driver was already waiting at the curb. No cameras, no press. By the time she pulled into the school parking lot, students were already arriving with science fair projects cradled in their arms. Layla stood near the entrance, holding a trifold board decorated with planets and tiny LED lights. Danielle got out of the car and stood still for a moment, watching her daughter laugh with a friend. Layla looked up, then ran. Mom Danielle dropped her bag and opened her arms. The hug was fierce and grounding. She kissed her daughter's forehead and smiled. "I didn't think you'd make it," Layla whispered. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Danielle replied. They walked into the school, side by side, mother and daughter, no headlines trailing behind them, just shared joy. Later that afternoon, after the fair, after lunch and laughter and simple, ordinary things, Danielle returned home and stepped into her study. A stack of letters sat on her desk, handwritten ones. She picked up the top envelope. It was from a woman in Oklahoma. "Dear Miss Harper, I've worked as a nurse for 27 years. I've sat in break rooms where people questioned whether I was qualified to lead. Your story reminded me that sometimes the best way to prove you belong is to stop trying to convince anyone. Just be who you are. Thank you." Another from a college student in Maryland. "I've watched the video of you staying in that seat over and over, not because I like drama, but because I've never seen someone who looked like me do that so quietly and still shake the world." And another. "I moved because they asked. You didn't, and now I won't again. Ever." Danielle placed the letters gently back in the stack. She turned to her laptop and opened a blank document. A new project, not a company initiative, not a media response, a foundation. She typed the name carefully. The Stay Seated Fund. Its purpose would be simple: to support marginalized travelers who face discrimination in transit, to fund research into racial bias in transportation, to educate frontline staff in compassion, cultural awareness, and accountability, to remind people that staying in your seat isn't defiance, it's dignity. As she typed, Sophia called. "Press just broke the news. SkyRoad is adopting every one of your policy recommendations, full retraining, independent oversight. They even renamed their internal ethics policy after you." Danielle paused. "What are they calling it?" Sophia smiled on the other end of the line. "The Harper Standard." Danielle exhaled softly. She hadn't wanted her name attached to it. But if it meant something real changed, if it meant fewer passengers would be questioned for simply sitting down, then maybe it was worth it. Sophia continued. "Also, the White House just reached out. You've been invited to join a panel on racial equity and transportation reform." Danielle didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the photo framed on her desk. Her and Layla, 5 years earlier. Both smiling, wind in their hair, seated together on their first flight after Danielle had been named CEO. That had been a good day. This was a better one. "Tell them I'll consider it," she said quietly. After the call, she walked outside to the backyard garden, letting her bare feet press into the grass. The morning sun warmed her skin. Wind moved gently through the trees. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't moving. She was simply being. The events on Flight 227 had changed everything, but they had not broken her. If anything, they had reminded her of the strength she already carried. Not loud, not aggressive, just still, rooted, present. That night, Danielle and Layla cooked dinner together, pasta with homemade sauce, music playing low in the background. Layla danced between the counter and the table, making a mess Danielle didn't bother to stop. "Mom," Danielle looked up. "Do people still think you shouldn't have been in that seat?" Danielle wiped her hands and crouched down beside her daughter. "Some people will always think that," she said gently. "But what matters is that I know I belong there. And now, so do a lot of other people." Layla nodded slowly. "Good. Because next time we fly, I want the window seat." Danielle laughed and pulled her daughter into a hug. "You got it." Later that night, after Layla was asleep, Danielle sat by the window, gazing up at the sky. Somewhere, planes were flying, people were moving, lives were shifting. She thought about every single person who had watched that video, who had seen her calmly insist that she was staying, not out of anger, but out of truth. She thought about Melissa Stanton. She wondered what her journey would look like now. She thought about Lucas Martinez, about his courage to speak up in real time, and the future that voice might build. And she thought about every little girl, sitting in the back, wondering if they'll ever be allowed in the front. "You will," Danielle thought, "not because someone lets you, but because you belong." She didn't need applause, she didn't need a legacy, but if someone else sat in their rightful seat one day because she did not move, that was enough. Danielle Harper closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed, and outside, the sky remained vast. The journey continued. Danielle Harper didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She didn't walk away. She simply stayed seated, and in doing so, she made the world stop and look inward. What if standing up against injustice doesn't always require a fight, but a quiet refusal to shrink? What if one calm woman in a leather seat could shake the foundation of an industry built on silent assumptions? As we follow her journey from humiliation to transformation, we're reminded that dignity isn't granted, it's claimed. And sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is take up the space you've earned. But this isn't just about Danielle. This is about all the unseen moments, all the people asked to move, all the voices not heard, and the systems that let it happen again and again. It's time to say no more. If this story touched your heart, challenged your thinking, or made you see the world just a little differently, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we're telling the stories that need to be told, because justice starts with awareness, and awareness that starts right here with you. Stay with us. More powerful stories are coming.